Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Recruiting Podcast. I'm Alex Rojas, your talent advisor and host. And in today's episode, it's part 2 of my series, HR versus recruiting. That's right, the battle within. And I really wanted to focus on why human resources and talent acquisition don't get along. And I'm going to definitely touch in this episode solutions on how we can partner up and get along together. But again, in the last episode, I started to lay out the case on why human resources and talent acquisition clash. And in this episode, I'm going to continue to demonstrate those reasons. I really want to make sure that they're very strong and they're very apparent because these are two totally different organizations. They run differently. Their DNA strands are highly different from each other. They have different mindsets. They're not of the same class here. They clash with each other. Yet corporate America, for decades now, leadership and the C-level team continues to force this relationship. And they do this by forcing talent acquisition to report directly to human resources. So stick around until the end of this episode. I'm going to provide you a solution on how to get along. So let's discuss. Okay, so as I continue to lay out this case here for you, I want to make sure that I focus on what are the distinctive differences between human resources and talent acquisition. So I'm going to round up this top 5 list here and go ahead and go through these. And again, I want to show you specifically on why these two departments clash with each other. So coming in at number 6, this is the 6th area as a continuation. It's going to be resources and budget gaps. So when we look at human resources can be pretty territorial when it comes to their budget or when it comes to their resources, and probably rightly so because they have a large level of responsibility within a company. And so, but when you look at the overall budgets, a lot of times there's a big contrast and a big difference when it comes to HR to the recruiting budget. Also, when you look at HR, they usually have to tap in to a lot of additional resources and consultants and legal consultation and things of that nature. And not only that, they also have to promote internal corporate programs as well. So that's going to require a lot of resources, a lot of attention, a lot of finance, a lot of money to sustain human resources. Now, if you look at the talent acquisition side of the house, talent acquisition has to invest in the infrastructure. And the core infrastructure for TA is ultimately going to be the ATS system. So number one, the ATS system, which again, depending on the size of your organization, could be several hundred thousands of dollars, even perhaps up towards $1 million that they're paying for. The next level of investments that talent acquisition is going to look at are going to be the CRM and job boards. And there's really going to be a lot of limitations. A lot of times there's limitations when it comes to CRM because it's too expensive. So small, mid-sized companies don't see the value behind that, but it does really hinder talent acquisition from being effective in their sourcing capabilities. And then there's always that dramatic problem when it comes to job boards and job board usage and seats and licenses, because recruiters tend not to use these things, these tools that are available. But there's going to be other investments that TA needs when it comes from a budget and a resource standpoint. And these are going to be research and data tools. These are also going to be like social media resources. All of these things really help out when it comes to talent acquisition. Okay, the 7th area that we want to focus on, again, distinct differences here are going to be communication styles. So if we look at human resources, HR, very authoritative, almost kind of legalistic, and they have to be legalistic because in the previous episode, I really honed in on the compliance issues. They're responsible for policing the organization and making sure everything stays compliant. So there is sort of a legalistic type of tone in their communication, which tends to come across as slightly arrogant. And I don't even know if it's an awareness thing or what have you, or it's just part of their DNA thread. And because they're focused on legal and compliance issues and things of that nature, they tend to be very procedural in their communication style. So it's very matter of fact. Here's how it's going to be, almost like a parenting type of communication style, maybe. And then when we look at talent acquisition, we're known to be a little salesy, a little marketing focused. We got that sales and marketing, splash in how we communicate and how we talk. But at the same time, a lot of TA, a lot of recruiters essentially become order takers because they get a lot of the information, a lot of their marching orders comes from filling requirements. So it's constantly, I need to fill this, I need to hire this many people. So they become order takers in their communication style, and they don't tend to push back or be consultative in nature. So they're also very activity driven. And so this is a big factor for talent acquisition because not only are they really focus on the level of activity on a day-to-day basis, but also they're really focused on being results oriented. At the end of the day, they want to know how many hires they have. So everything has to be sort of matter of fact on where we are within talent acquisition when it comes to the hiring. Okay, the eighth area of distinct differences between TA and HR is going to be conflicting priorities. If we look at the human resource department, they're primarily going to be focused on attrition. They want to make sure that those attrition percentages numbers, they're at a reasonable market value rate. I mean, sometimes that could be very difficult, and because it goes month to month, it can change pretty dramatically. So they're going to be held to that standard, which means that they have to look at the retention values within the organization. And not only that, they're constantly assessing employees and their performance as well. So that's where the performance reviews, annual reviews, preparing for that, that's a big heavy lift for human resources to be able to do. And then there's going to be those employee relation issues that we talked about, but there's a lot of disciplinary actions that take place, and even termination. That's right. They're the ones that have to terminate employment with some of these employees that don't make it out for whatever reason. So their priorities are completely different, because if we look at talent acquisition, it's all about sourcing, the amount of candidates, building those pipelines. It's about screening candidates, making sure that you're talking and qualifying those right candidates. And then it's about submitting your candidates or your applicants to the hiring manager, getting them through the process, and then the scheduling frenzy that goes along with that, getting the feedback from it, but ultimately leading into an interview and hire decision on that front. Okay, the ninth area here, why TA and human resources are different, it really comes down to culture and philosophy. So if we were to look at human resources, again, from a culture standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, they're really focused on benefits. That's probably, if you were to equate human resources in 2 words, I think, or in 3 words, you would probably come up with benefits, employee benefits, and employee relations. Those are probably the 2 things that stand up front and center. But compensation is also another area that they have to focus on, making sure that there's good internal equity, market value, making sure that they're keeping a pulse on the employees so that they're not trickling out of the company. So again, we talked about performance reviews. That is a very philosophical, very culture-centric type of area here, to making sure that the rating system, the ranking system, because that's where money continues to be spent when it comes to that. But then they're also going to really pay attention to their customer, and their customer could be the internal stakeholders. And I think that plays a big part of how culturally human resources operates. Now, if we look at talent acquisition, they're going to really tend to want to stay in their own lanes. They know not to venture into human resources. They say, hey, I'm in recruiting, I'm in talent acquisition, this is my lane. So they know their boundaries. They're not going to go ahead and spill into HR. And that's kind of a philosophical thing, I think a culture thing that TA tends to do, where HR will step into the talent acquisition lane. It won't even have any problem on it. And so I think that's when things start really kind of muddying the water, so to speak. But again, talent acquisition also focuses on the employer branding. Employer branding is really big when it comes to that, that sort of the candidate experience, because as they interact and engage with candidates, the branding of what that experience will be like once they become an employee is important. And then I'd say the other thing that TA and recruiters really focus on is going to be making sure that it's a good culture fit, because recruiting acts in a broker kind of way, not only representing a future employee of a company, but they're also representing the stakeholders, leadership, the customers, everybody involved on the corporate side of it as well. Okay, and then finally, the 10th area here, why there are distinct differences between talent acquisition and human resources, is really leadership differences. Just leadership styles are completely different here. And so when we look at human resources, I would say that human resources tends to be a little egocentric when it comes to really kind of their leadership style. And rightly so. Again, just like they got bigger budgets, I think there's a lot more responsibility put on human resources. And so they have to have this leadership sort of quality, a part of them that has to say, hey, my ego has to be elevated because I am policing the company. I'm policing the employees. And so training and development is a real big part of also their leadership style. And the more training, the more development, I think the more retention really kind of that ties into that from a leadership standpoint. And then I'd also say that, again, human resources, because their direct lines typically go to the C-level, they have really outstanding reputation. They have a seat at the table when it comes to CEOs or COOs or C-level executives that are running the day-to-day operations of a company. So their voice matters, their opinion matters, their recommendations matter, and they really, they lead from a position of strength overall. Now, when you look at talent acquisition is going to be really more operating in an independent, almost kind of a silo fashion. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned previously. They tend to stick into their own lanes. But by working independently and in sort of in a silo sort of area, they have the desire to really have partnership, relationships with all the different departments. And I think that's kind of in the nature of TA when it comes to leadership, is making sure that there is a partnership, a healthy partnership, not only with HR, but also with the C-level executives, but also with the finance team, with also the sales team. And so that's a big leadership quality that they have, is a willingness to really be able to do that. They also were really focused on problem solving, because problems constantly arise every day for recruiters. And so you're always looking to try to see, hey, what's the solution? How can I solve for this problem? And then ultimately, I think the big part about leadership, the difference here for talent acquisition in HR, for TA, they're really going to focus on customer service. And again, whether that's internal or external, it's a big part of recruiters' leadership style. And you can see clearly here that this last group of 5 that I just outlined will demonstrate, in the case that I've been trying to lay out to you here, that there are distinct differences between both of these departments. So as we wrap up this 2-part series, I think one of the things here that I really want to demonstrate here is that both of these departments, HR and TA, are very effective. They're highly effective in what they do. They require a high performance capability. Now, it used to be that human resources was the one that was responsible for retention. What I have seen over the last few years in the marketplace is actually that the retention is starting to pour a little bit into talent acquisition. And when you think about it, talent acquisition is the first impression. They are the ones that are the first line of defense. The recruiters are the ones that build rapport with those candidates, with those future employees. And so what we're seeing now is that because they have rapport and they have a sense of loyalty, they can actually check in with the employees just to see how they're doing. Employees are willing to be more transparent with a recruiter within talent acquisition than they are with HR or an employee relations, HR generalist. And that's just to be true, right? They're a little bit more guarded talking to HR versus talking to somebody on the TA side. That may even be a personality play. But I really truly believe that both of these organizations, the best way to approach a partnership is to be consultative in nature. And I believe if TA and HR can be consultative whenever they interact, whenever they engage, whenever they collaborate, whenever they brainstorm with each other, you're creating a winning strategy, a winning culture within your organization. And I firmly believe, I want to say this very clearly, I firmly believe that human resources and talent acquisition should have their own direct line of reporting directly to the CEO or the C-level executive. Whoever is responsible for the day-to-day operations, HR and talent acquisition should have their own direct line to them. Now, the reality is that there's a small percentage that work in this model. And if I were to guess or estimate, I'd say it's going to be somewhere between, 10 to 20% at best that operate in this function. And so really what we're looking at a very old model in the way corporate America is doing business. They have not changed or enhanced the way that they engage talent acquisition by dropping them under human resources and having that push-pull sort of battle. I bet you that if you were to ask recruiters to complete a confidential survey and you would ask them, who do you want to report to? Do you believe that your TA should report directly to the CEO, or do you believe that human resources should report directly? Almost 100% of recruiters would say absolutely, without a doubt, they believe that they should report directly to the CEO. They should have a seat at the table. I hope this episode was informative. Please remember to like, to subscribe, to comment, to share. Also, be sure to watch some of the other recommended episodes that YouTube is mentioning right here. Until the next time, remember, it's all about the mindset.